Hi everyone, my name's Lily. I'm the book reviewer behind Utopia State of Mind, and today I'm bringing you my September wrap up. I'm filming this actually on the last day of September. It's one of the earliest opportunities I always have to film, so I always pat myself on the back when I manage to get that done. These are all the physical books I read in September. I'll just put them all up here to show you. I read a lot. I'm trying actively, specifically at the end of the year, to get through my physical books, and I'm happily this was a pretty good haul here. And I have my TBR kind of staring at me all the time over there. I'm looking at it now for October, so fingers crossed. But anyway, in September I read a bunch of books. If you saw in September, or you'll be seeing in October, there are a lot of panels that were before and panels that are coming up. So I had a bunch of panel reading to do because I want to take off some time at the end of the year to kind of de-stress from panels before I move into 2025 season, which I've already begun planning. So no rest for me. But anyway, that's why that month I had a ton of books that I read. I was really kind of going through them to try to get all the panel books read and also to get these books read, and books that had been on my TBR for a really, really long time. So of the 41 books that I read, 51% of those featured characters of color as main characters, and 39% of those featured queer characters as main characters, which, if you've been following me for a while, you'll know that I'm pretty much bang on my statistic goal, which is always 50% and 33%, so about a half and a third. And so I'm just chugging along in 2024, making my way through. In terms of September, it was so stressful. So if you saw my August wrap up, you'll know that at the end of August, I wasn't feeling well. I was feeling sick. I had travel plans, but I was sick. It just wasn't a great month in general. September kind of started off of that, where I was also recovering from that and just feeling awful, which meant that in the middle to end of September, I was reading a bunch to kind of catch up from them. And September, I hit the ground kind of sprinting, and I've been sprinting ever since. So based on how October is going to go, I think I'll have to take a little bit of a pace reduction. At one point, I had gotten it down to having to read 6, different mini chunks of books a day. I'm a one book a day kind of person, as in I can only really read one. That would be my ideal pace. But because I've been book reviewing and book blogging and book existing, I've steadily upped it into kind of my general thing is my main book that I'm reading, which I read a little bit more of, and then I'll read really kind of small snippets of these other 4 books, and it's normally a book for a panel, a book for an upcoming subscription box that I just want to make sure to see if I want to skip it or not, a romance book, and then normally I had a for fun book slot, but based on the timing of stuff, sometimes it's just 2 panel books that I had to read, and in September that was what it was. And then in September, then I also got a lot of library books that came in. Literally, if you saw a couple of my TikToks, and I'll post the links down below, I had I think 6 or 7 library holds on at different points for audiobooks, and I was trying to stagger it. It just was a really intense month that I did to myself. So September was really hard. In terms of making stuff, I did make some stuff. I finished one of the cardigan pieces. I don't have it to show you because mostly it's not done. I am 1 session away from finishing the last front piece of the cardigan, and then I'll have the 2 sleeves. Then I'll need to kind of get it all together, and then I'll need to do the band around it, and then the stars for the elbows. My goal is to get this done by the end of the year. So please be rooting for me. I think that I probably can get it done. I think in October, I'll try to do 1 sleeve and a half. Today, later on, I'll try to finish the rest of the first kind of front panel because it really only needs an hour more, basically. Then I'll try to do the sleeves in October and half of November. Then I'll try to get my handy dandy assistant to seam it all together, and then I'll do the button bands and I don't know. It'll get done. It has to. I've been working on this for so long, and I've put a lot of my other projects on hold, some sweaters I wanted to do. I also need to crochet some pot holders for a friend's family member. So to go through to stash bust my old cotton yarn. I mentioned that, and they were like, hey, could you do this? And I said, yes. Yes, I can. And I want to experiment with some different color patterns and some different patterns in general. So I'm excited for that. But like October, November is going to be intense. I think I mentioned this in my August wrap up that when panel season started, there would not be like a single weekend that I wasn't either doing a panel or having to travel for a project or having to travel for fun or travel for work. Like it just, till the end of 2024, it's just nonstop. And so prepare for all my wrap ups for the rest of the year to be like, I'm stressed. Just stress. Okay, great. Let me talk about my favorite books of September. I had a bunch that I really, really loved, and some others that I also wanted to mention as well. So, what should I do? Let me just start off with my favorites. The first one is A Constellation of Minor Bears. I loved this one so much. Like, I've really loved Jen Ferguson's books in general. The Summer of Bitter and Sweet, those pink summer nights, and now A Constellation of Minor Bears, which may be my favorite. I did not think that it was going to surpass The Summer of Bitter and Sweet because that book, that main relationship is just so good. A Constellation of Minor Bears was just so fabulous in the way that it not only looks at this friendship trio and in a variety of different perspectives that we see them in. I'm a sucker for a friendship trio. I'm a sucker for friends to lovers. I also love teens who decide that they want to hike long distances. I could never. I could never. I'm not a camping girly. So this was all the things that I'm really, really excited for all in once. And A Constellation of Minor Bears is such a tender, heart wrenching, emotional story as well about grief, and it's about loss, but loss of like a future, loss of possibilities, and anger, and like grappling with all of these things, specifically when they're with friends or family members, and you're like, how do I love you and also be so angry with you? How do I love you and also be so sad myself, or I feel so guilty? How do I have these relationships anymore with these people that used to know me like the back of my skin? And it takes that, and it also just like sets it also on this hiking journey as well, where it discusses anti-indigenous racism, and it also discusses fat phobia. Like it is just jam packed with really amazing kind of nuanced emotional gut punches. It is so good, and it has surpassed Summer of Bitter and Sweet. The next ones I want to mention actually is one of these. Hold on, let me just grab it really quickly. And it is I Feed Her to the Beast, and the Beast is me. I'll link down below. I helped launch a reread campaign for this one before the sequel, which is something about the dark. They're mouthy titles. I love a good mouthy title, but they are mouthy titles. But for me, it was a first read for the campaign, and I loved this so much. Like I knew I was gonna love it because I have some really close friends who adored this book, and I was excited for it. And it is just this gritty, like dangerous, blood soaked story about ambition and about like, there's a quote, and I don't have my phone, but basically it's something along the lines of like, they demanded everything from me and they still wanted more. It is a look about competitive ballet. And as someone who was a ballet dancer as a teen, but not competitively, I really felt this kind of drive, this like idea that you practice hard enough, you give everything you want, like you kind of get as small as possible, basically, so like people can pick you up, and so for point shoes and whatever and whatever, and it's not enough. And like that just, it like hit me so hard in I Feed Her to the Beast, and the Beast is me. But just this idea of a world that will just keep taking and taking from you, ambition and greed that will just keep taking and taking from you. And what do you have, honestly, at the end of it? Like what do you have at the end of it that makes it all worth it? This book, all in all, I'm really excited for the sequel. I don't know anything about it, honestly, and I just wanted to mention this one, a backlist favorite for me at this point. And the next one, in the YA category at least, is The Dark We Know, which is a story about legacy. It's like a YA, kind of skews a little bit towards the horror, a little bit like of a thriller aspect, about the past and like the hold and the reach that the past has on us, and navigating the past and legacy and home and like all of these different things in a speculative fiction, kind of spooky, kind of scary vibe. Like it is going to be perfect for the October season, for Spooktober. I'm not a Spooktober girly. I'm a big scaredy cat. But I really enjoyed The Dark We Know. And actually, The Dark We Know and I Feed Her to the Beast and The Beast Stars Me are both really intense, sort of like horror-esque, thriller-esque books. So I'm actually surprised that both of them made it in because, as I said, I'm not a scared person. Like, I want to not be scared at all times in my life. I feel like I have so much anxiety, so much fears that I already have in my body. Like, in some ways, I feel like horror and thriller kind of takes me out of those fears for small bursts of time, and I appreciate that. But at the same time, some horror, some thriller, some mysteries take me a little bit too close to those fears about that I already have. Anyway, before I get more into that, the next ones I want to talk about are adult releases, and the first one is Night Strider, which is just was so good. It's about like demons. It has like an enemies to lovers kind of vibe to it. It has a lot of politics. It has a lot of, but for me, I love a good kind of struggle with redemption. And in Night Strider, we have this kind of doubled. We have one character who's kind of struggling at the moment, who has to kind of make this decision. Am I finally going to kind of break free? Am I going to do this? And what is it going to cost me? And then we have another character who has already done this and is trying really desperately to make up for what they've done in the past. And so they're both at different points in their lives, but they've also struggled with similar things. And then it has another character with like prophecies and foretellings. It took me out of my life while I read it. It was so transformative. It transported me. It was just so fun as well, while also being realistic and gritty and a little bit dark about kind of ambition and about corruption and about bad leadership and like being used as a weapon. That is a huge theme in Night Strider, and I really, really loved that one. So I had to mention that one. The next one is actually an audiobook that I finally read, and it's To Shape a Dragon's Breath. I've been looking forward to this book forever. Like, I don't know what honestly happened. I think that I thought that I pre-ordered it and never did, and so I had to wait forever for it to come from the library, and it did, and I immediately started it, and I really, really loved it. Like, the pacing was different than I expected because honestly, going into To Shape a Dragon's Breath, I knew nothing about it except dragons. Like, that had been how it was marketed to me. That's obviously also how it is in the title, Dragon's Breath. But To Shape a Dragon's Breath is a book that is so amazing. It is a book that talks about power. It talks about narrative. It talks about history. It talks about like whitewashing. It without necessarily being set in our specific world. There are a lot of kind of analogies and metaphors that are very close that you can see. It talks a lot about anti-Indigenous racism, the treatment of Indigenous peoples in the book, and the way that they are treated, the way that their histories, the way that everything is skewed, the racism, the prejudices, the stereotypes, like all of that is such a big theme in To Shape a Dragon's Breath. And I love how the main character and like various side characters are all kind of figuring out not only how to struggle with themselves and their identity and them in opposition, in synergy, relation to kind of the colonial forces at B, and also how they're going to necessarily see themselves in these systems of power, but also how will they see themselves for the future. That is a huge theme in To Shape a Dragon's Breath, and I think it's going to be a series. I don't know when the second one is coming out, but I assume that theme is going to just be kind of more and more developed, and I'm here for it because I really loved it. It manages to be this cute, this queer, this like feel good story while also really trying to dig into those themes and dig into honoring one's cultures, honoring one's traditions, honoring one's history, while also realizing that there are things that we have to learn. There are things that we can impart onto our beliefs, onto our families, and ways that we can evolve without becoming the same, is how I want to say that. And so that's why To Shape a Dragon's Breath is here. There's also, where is it? The Teller of Small Fortunes, which was so cute. Like, I had heard about this one as a cozy fantasy recommendation. 100% agree. But to me, The Teller of Small Fortunes is a book that really examines being on your own and what it would be like to find people who will support us, find people who will be there for us. I think that maybe that's one of the cozier themes. Like, found family, I think, and cozy fantasy are often very closely linked. That's definitely a theme here. I think another theme that I really enjoyed as well in here is kind of this idea of responsibility and power and the greater good. And also, there's things in here where our main character, Tao, is facing like the racism and facing prejudices within this fantastical world and conflicts between their past homeland country or like their past heritage country and then where they live now and how their parents like navigate that as well. And so that's definitely a theme in Tao's book. Um, and how people treat Tao because of her ethnicity is another big theme here. But I think one of the ways that it ties into power is kind of like with the power of being a fortune teller, and specifically for her because she's chosen to tell small fortunes, not large fortunes. Read the book to figure out why. But it's a story as well that talks about what power do we have? What responsibility do we have to our magical abilities, to our power as a person, to our usage of our own voice, and how these kind of fit into global structures of power and oppression, and like people who are doing the wrong thing for right reasons or the right things for wrong reasons. It is like a book that packs that definitely into a development of the theme that kind of really grows as the book continues and is more kind of a ladder third, I'd say, but really kind of deepens up my feelings that I had at the end of The Teller of Small Fortunes. And finally, I also want to mention The Last Hour Between Worlds, which was fantastic. I knew that I was going to love it because I've really, really loved books from this author before, like The Obsidian Tower, The Tethered Mage, The Defiant Heir, and The Unbound Empire. So I was really excited for this one. This is a timey-wimey. You will have seen it in my timey-wimey video. I will put the link down below. I've now finished it since that video and now, and 100% really love it. I cannot wait for more of this series. I love the timey-wiminess 100%. I also love this new character who is going through kind of re-identifying herself as her identity as a person versus her as a mother, and also in conjunction with as well. In The Last Hour Between Worlds, it's also queer. Like, it just is so good. I love just the timey-wimey world building kernel of this world, the idea of the echoes. I love the rivals to maybe more kind of vibes here. I also loved the politics in this book. It just is really, really fun, and I had to mention it because I wanted also to report back based on the timey-wimey video, but also this, 100% recommend. I love it. I also just saw that there's a Waterstones exclusive edition, so I have things to do after this video. But anyway, I just wanted to mention that one here. And that concludes, one more thing. I do want to talk a little bit about how I felt about Once Upon a Broken Heart. Not only about this one, but actually about the Games Gods Play, which is in a different pile of mine because I'm passing that on to a friend of mine. But that and like this book, obviously here. Firstly, I want to mention, let's just talk about the Games Gods Play. I felt like I think we are seeing a lot of books that are coming up in the world as people who grew up with like the Hunger Games, grew up with like all of these kind of different influences. And so we're seeing a lot of those things coming back, which I do appreciate. But the Games Gods Play, like, I just did not feel the romance aspect particularly. It just was not working for me. To be fair, I think that sometimes with all the mythological retelling, specifically of the Greek pantheon, I feel like there are some ones that kind of hit the mark more often than they actually hit the nail on the head. This Greek pantheon, I don't hate. I wish we had seen a little bit more about the actual gods, because we're supposed to really kind of just be like, can't trust gods. Gods might be good, gods might be bad. Yes, for the most part, I do agree with that. But at the same time, I felt like we're missing a lot of nuance in it to identify why Hades particularly might be either a product of this or separate from that. In general, I feel like Hades needed more character development for me to feel for him. Not only feel for him and his plight, which is in the book, but also feel for him in the romance sense. Like, I just did not feel the romance at all. For a while, I thought it was a love triangle. The romance aspect for me was the weakest of all of them, honestly, in the Games God Play. And I did like the trials, but they went by really fast. Like, the Games Gods Play, the chapters were really, really short, which meant that everything just felt like it was going and going and going. I feel like every chapter something was happening, and when a chapter is only maybe like 10 pages, that's just a lot to put in. And so if you like fast-paced books, this definitely fits the bill. For me, I needed a lot more time to kind of sink into these characters, to really understand their stakes and to understand what was happening. Like, if it's a deadly series of trials, and so people will die. And for contestants, I feel like in order to feel the stake of that, you need to get invested in characters, specifically side characters. And it was really hard for me in the games Gods Play to do that. I just felt like only towards the end did I get to know a little bit of some of them, but not even that many of them. And so they'd be like, oh, this person died, I'm so sad. And I'm like, wait, who was this person again? Like, so that one kind of was a miss for me, unfortunately. I had really high hopes. It's a gorgeous book, but it was a miss for me. And the next one I want to talk about as well is Once Upon a Broken Heart, which is not as much of a miss for me as that one, but I read Caraval and it was okay. I felt like for me, in Caraval, everyone was like, oh, it's a story about sisters. And yeah, there are sisters in Caraval, but that wasn't the strongest aspect for me. And I gotta say, in Once Upon a Broken Heart, I spent half the time being like, how much have I missed by not finishing Caraval Legendary and Finale? Like, I just felt like there are so many things about the character of Jack, the Prince of Hearts, which I felt like maybe I needed to know. And it is a standalone series. It is eventually kind of discussed a little bit. And it's been so long since I read the other ones, I really don't know how much of that was in it. I tried to do some Googling, and some Googling was like, okay, this is what you need to know. And some of them were like, no, you need to read the whole series. And I didn't. And so half the time of this book, I was really struggling with that. And the other half was that the pacing at the beginning was like you were just thrown in, right? So I don't think it's much of a spoiler because it's within the first chapter basically, but you're kind of thrown into this world, and then all of a sudden 6 weeks pass. I won't tell you why, but just 6 weeks pass. And that really threw me for a loop. Like, I don't think I recovered for a couple reading sessions afterwards because I was kind of like, what is happening? What is happening? And so it was weird because the first 25%, that was my thing. Like, what is happening? I don't understand why I should care about anybody. I don't even really understand who these characters are. And then the next 25%, I was kind of getting into it, but it still felt a little bit shallow. And towards the end, I think the main character of Evangeline really does kind of step into her own. And we do get more of the kind of like the seeds for the rest of the series and why we should care about Jack and what Jack's doing and like Jack's motivations and everything like that. But that to me was a late game thing. And so the beginning to me very much was kind of just fairy tale vibes, fairy tale atmosphere. And I have nothing against that. I do really, really enjoy that. But because it was almost like 90% fairy tale, and then there'd always be a little comments like 10% of the time in the first half where it'd be like, oh, but then Jack's up to something, and then I'd be like, okay, tell me more, and then it would be 90% and then 10% and 90% and 10%, and the first half just felt a little bit weirdly paced, in which everything was fast and then slow and then like a little bit more and then a little bit less. And just the balance on the first half kind of threw me for a loop. By the ending, I was definitely more into it. And it's to the point in which it's like, I would potentially read the sequel. I've buddy read this with Hannah from Ink and Mist, and so I'll leave Hannah's social media down below. And we buddy read it together, which is the only reason why I'd buddy read or why I read the second book if we buddy read the second book. But yeah, this one was just a little bit of a kind of, the first half felt so different than the second half. They felt almost like a first book was like one, this was one book and this was the sequel already, in terms of development, in terms of plot depth for the future, that I enjoyed it. It was okay, but with the hype upon this and the hype in general, especially, and this is how I felt with Caraval as well, I was just kind of confused for a little bit. And so I did want to report back because I have kind of been posting about this, and I do kind of report back when I have really kind of like hyped things that I've seen, and I want to give you my thoughts just in case you're here for that. So This was an extremely long video. I hope that you all had a really great month of September. Let me know down below if you've read any of those. Let me know down below if you have thoughts about the games God Play or Once Upon a Broken Heart. Let me also know what your favorite book was from September that you would recommend that I read the rest of the year, which is not going to happen, by the way, but is something that is interesting, I guess. And I will see you in the next wrap-up video where I will be extremely stressed. All right. Bye.